Hello. I wanted to celebrate Christmas by making my own Warhammer Campaign box style scenario based on the tale of dead King Wenceslas, a once noble king of an ancient age who accidentally got all of his men killed and resurrected as soulless skeletons. But it turns out that making campaign packs is a little bit more difficult than I had imagined. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today we're exploring my work in progress, the Carole of Dead King Wenceslas. Right, let's just get a couple of things out of the way first. Although this project was very much inspired by my love of Warhammer and those campaign boxes of yesteryear, I've not used any specific Warhammer IPs or locations or characters in writing this story and this scenario. It is very much system and setting agnostic, so you could use Warhammer any edition you want, but you could also use one-page rules or Kings of War or War Machine, or pretty much any campaign gaming system that you want, any war game at all, and that is on purpose. It's not set in the Warhammer world, it's just inspired by my feelings about it. And secondly, and perhaps alarmingly, I haven't quite finished this project, or at least not the version of it that I originally set out to create. My big plan earlier in the year was to create a multi-scenario campaign where you would fight through them, the battle results from each one of those informing the battle that you were about to have. And that requires loads of work to put together. And here on the channel recently, I've just been super busy. Lots of really awesome stuff. Very thankful for all of that. But it's just meant that I've not had quite as much time available to work on this project. Because the other thing that I wanted to do was to fight those battles and to tell those stories here on the channel as narrative battle reports. Still stuff that I want to work on, but unfortunately I've not been able to complete this year. What I have done is write the full story of the dead King Wenceslas, and I've also written the final scenario, and I've commissioned some absolutely stunning art, and I also wrote a song, and a friend of mine who is a professional musician has recorded it, and I think the package that I've put together is actually really good fun. So we're going to explore that in more detail later. But why don't we start by giving this video a like, and then we'll take a look at the historical inspirations that have informed the creation of this, both at the gaming table and at the table of life, I guess. Warhammer 2nd Edition did a lot of its world building in two ways. One would be through the telling of brief stories about specific units and characters that were being produced by Citadel Miniatures. Stuff like the Regiments of Renown, Bugman's Rangers, Golfag's Ogres, the Barda Gargoyles. They'd all get short bits of background on flyers that were inserted inside boxes or put on the back of those boxes, or published in things like the Citadel Journal. And then the other way that we found out more about the Warhammer world as it was taking shape was through scenarios and the characters that those stories were about. Some of Warhammer's oldest special characters, like Heinrich Kemmler and his champion Carole, were created for scenarios that were included in a campaign pack, The Terror of the Lichemaster. Lichemaster was written by Rick Priestley and would get a sequel in the pages of the Citadel Journal, co-written by Jez Goodwin, that actually introduced Skaven into the Warhammer world. These campaign packs and scenarios were doing the heavy lifting in fleshing out what the Warhammer world was becoming. The Terror of the Lichemaster box set was one of 4 campaign boxes released in the 80s for Warhammer Fantasy. One was Bloodbath at Orc's Drift by lone wolf duo Gary Chalk and Joe Deaver, along with Ian Page. There was also a terrain and lore pack called Blood on the Streets that didn't have any scenarios, but did have loads of cardboard cutout buildings. And then, of course, there was the legendary campaign, The Tragedy of McDeath, featuring a remarkable cover by John Blanche and written by Richard Halliwell, with art by Dave Andrews. Macbeth marks perhaps the height of humour and silliness in the Warhammer world, featuring a blend of satire, absurdity, wordplay, and just plain goofy fun. With later editions, the Warhammer world became more fleshed out in many other ways, and there were plenty of scenarios and missions available from plenty of official sources like White Dwarf. But it wouldn't be until the 5th edition that we'd see the campaign box make a return. Whilst they borrowed many of the key aspects of their 2nd edition ancestors, the 5th edition campaign boxes took a more straightforward and focused approach to campaign storytelling. They would feature 2 opposing factions who would fight it out over 4 separate battles, and they would also have new characters, new stories, and plenty of faction-specific terrain. Probably my favourite of these is Grudge of Drong, a Nigel Stillman-designed historical grudge match between dwarves and elves that features some terrific dwarven buildings to fight over. High Elves featured again in the Tears of Aisha, this time fighting another of their classic foes, the Dark Elves. This one was written by Tuomas Pyronen, as was Circle of Blood, which he co-wrote with Jake Thornton. Circle of Blood followed Bretonnians and the Undead, as the former Knight cum Red Duke returned from the grave to seek vengeance on his former countrymen. Bretonnians also appeared in Perilous Quest, matched against the Wood Elves in the midst of a Bretonnian encampment and jousting arena. Perilous Quest was again written by Nigel Stillman, as was the other campaign pack, the Idol of Gork, which saw Empire versus Orcs and Goblins in the Border Princes, almost placing the Empire forces into the role of the invader, stepping into Orc and Goblin villages. Around the same time as those 5th edition Warhammer Fantasy campaigns, there was also one produced for 2nd edition 40k, The Storm of Vengeance. Set in the Piscenas system, the campaign allowed players to pit Dark Angel Space Marines against a mighty greenskin invasion led by Ghazghkull Thraka. And if anybody remembers the game Chronopia, I also really liked the campaign boxes that they did for the 1st edition of that game in the 90s as well. I think basically these strange boxes of story and scenario and terrain are one of my favourite types of wargame expansion. They are a real meeting point between wargame and role-playing game. I guess the specificity of the campaign boxes with specific forces involved meant that the stories probably weren't as wide-ranging in appeal as a business that's trying to sell as many of a product as possible might actually want. But that doesn't stop me from just really enjoying them. I just think that they're such a fun way to tell these smaller scale stories, sometimes in the history of the world, but just within these worlds without moving forward the entire narrative of the setting. I do enjoy that. I think that the recent campaign books that have been done for Age of Sigmar and for 40k are really fun in that regard, but sometimes I don't want an earth-shattering, universe-defining battle or series of battles. I just want to fight a silly little dwarven grudge match against high elves that they were offended by sometime in history. The stakes are obviously high for the involved parties, but for the world, they're much smaller and more personal, and it can just be a fun story and character exercise as much as anything else. So that's the scenario of it all, but what about the king? Good King Wenceslas the Carole is a banger, and it was written in 1853 by English hymn writer John Mason Neale and his music editor Thomas Helmore. They set their lyrics to the tune of a pre-existing spring carol, who knew that they were a thing, called Tempus Adest Floridium, or Easter Time Is Come, that was actually written sometime in the 13th century. Neale and Helmore wrote their new carol to celebrate the feast of St. Stephen, which actually takes place on December 26th, and they chose for their topic the tale of Wenceslas I, Duke of Bohemia. You see, Wenceslas wasn't actually a king during his lifetime. He was a prince and a duke of Bohemia, or what would be the modern-day Czech Republic, and he was killed by his brother, who wanted the crown for himself. Interestingly, despite running his brother through with a lance in order to take power, Boleslas I is generally regarded as a pretty good ruler. Double interestingly, one of his sons was actually born on the same day that he assassinated Wenceslas. So, because the circumstances of his birth were considered so ominous, the child was named Strakvas, which actually means a dreadful feast. I'm no scholar of Bohemian history, so a lot of that stuff I read on Wikipedia or watched here on YouTube, but it seems like a fascinating story. Wenceslas was posthumously granted a martyrdom and the title of king by Pope Otto I, and a cult of Wenceslas formed to celebrate him as a noble and generous ruler. And that is where the idea of the good king comes from that inspired Neil and Helmore in the writing of their Carole. With all of that fascinating history and truth and legend, I think there's probably a very cool political story that you could tell in a fantasy setting if you wanted to. But I kind of didn't want to, so I threw out most of that stuff and just went for a far more simple and straightforward narrative. About this time last year, I was thinking about doing a Christmas special video. I'd only had my channel for a little over a month or so. It kind of felt a bit too ambitious to get stuck into, but I had this idea of the dead king Wenceslas. What if you flipped the story, and instead of, as he does in the Carole Good King Wenceslas, where the king goes out into the snow with his page, and he protects that page, and through his sort of saintly goodness, he is able to keep the page alive despite it being so snowy, because they're on a mission of mercy to deliver food and wine to one of the people of Wenceslas's kingdom. I thought, well, let's take that and turn it into something a lot more Warhammery, I guess. And if it wasn't a good king, what if he was a dead king and he'd led his soldiers out into that snow, but because of that same desire to do good without really thinking about it, he accidentally got everyone killed. They got frozen to death out in the middle of nowhere. And because this is a fantasy setting where bad things happen to good people, they all get brought back to life through some kind of curse that's just going to turn them into undead monstrosities. So I had what I thought was a pretty cool story, but I wasn't going to be able to make it in time for Christmas 2022, so I thought, okay, I'll put it to one side for a few months, and then I will spend time developing the story further, writing out all of these different missions and scenarios, writing out all of the extra stuff that you have to put into a campaign pack to make it all make sense and to flow, rules and objectives, victory conditions, all of that kind of stuff. And then I'll playtest it, and then I'll play it, and then I'll record it, and I can do all of that close to Christmas next year, which would be now where we are right today. And of course, it actually takes a really long time to do all of that stuff. So the year was ticking on, and as we got to the final quarter, I started to dust off all of those plans and want to pull it together into something. But even with 3 months to work on it, I didn't really realize that I wasn't going to have enough time to sit down and actually do it justice. So I wrote out the story of Dead King Wenceslas, and included within that story, there are all of the key elements for the scenarios that you would fight in the campaign, the different locations that you would see, and the various things that will get in your way, the obstacles and challenges that you would face. But I was beginning to be conscious that actually, if I wanted to write all of these different scenarios where the outcome of one battle actually has a measured impact on the subsequent battles, maybe it gives you access to more forces, maybe it changes the terrain that you're fighting on, or actually moves the story in a slightly different way, that was going to be really tough to actually balance and playtest. It wasn't something I could just do on my own on the fly. So instead of doing all of those scenarios, I decided to boil it down to just one. The final scenario, in which the heroes or the good guys or even bad guys who just want to kill the dead king, they have entered these dark woods and they found the cursed tree that gives the dead king his power, and they want to destroy it. So that is their objective. One side is trying to get to this tree and to destroy it, and the dead king and his warband of skeletons are trying to prevent that from happening. So knowing that I was simplifying the project down to just the story and the scenario, that didn't mean that I wouldn't need a nice package to put it in. Now, fortunately, I had had the foresight of much earlier starting to engage with some of the artists who I thought could help me bring this vision to life. And they were absolutely amazing. J. Moritz Krebs is an illustrator that produces incredible black and white art that is full of dark character and vibrant story. Krebs' art perfectly matched my vision for this creepy and somewhat retro feel. It definitely has that early Warhammer-inspired flavour that I was looking for. You can actually see some of Krebs' art turned into miniatures by Meridian, and they are amazing as well. absolutely awesome and well worth checking out on the next Kickstarter that they run. And with Krebs involved and producing art for the core book, I knew that it was going to look good and give the feel of this story that I wanted. But I also needed to make sure that I could visually tell the scenarios and the rules. So that's when I approached Carole, the artist that I had worked with before for my interactive fighting fantasy series. Hanny provided a load of amazing pieces that helped me to differentiate the different segments of that interactive story. So I asked Hanny to help me show the battle maps that would feature in the scenario. And so Hanny produced the map itself as well as some of the key features that appear on it. So that brings me to kind of where we are now. I've written the story, I've written the final scenario and the rules for it. I've got this amazing art, and I've been able to put all of that together into a single PDF package. This booklet that I've put together is kind of like a public beta test. You get the story, you get the amazing art, and you get that final scenario. I still want to playtest it more, and I'm hoping that a public playtest and the feedback that everybody can provide to me will help me to refine it and make sure it's as exciting as I would love it to be. And I want to continue working on the other scenarios that are sort of mentioned in the story. You can get a feel for what they would be, but I still need to playtest and fully design all of those as well. If you want to, you can go to DriveThruRPG right now and download Dead King Wenceslas. You can get this scenario booklet and you can play through it at your own leisure. I just really hope that if you do, you're willing to provide me with some feedback, either here in the comments or in the comments on DriveThru, or by getting in touch with me on social media, because I would love to hear what you think. It's actually listed as a pay what you want product, so you can have it for free if you want to. But I'm hoping that there'll be some folk who are willing to pay a little something towards it, just to help me cover the cost of the art and the time that it's taken to put it together. And I think that that will also help me to understand if there is more desire for more of this kind of work from me. And do you want to see me refine the Dead King Wenceslas package? Do you want me to sort of work on other similar stuff in the future? I would love to, but I just don't know if there's any interest out there, if there's a market, if people want to see more of this stuff from Jordan Sorcery. The link to Dead King Wenceslas on DriveThruRPG is in the description below, or you can jump over to the site and search for Jordan Sorcery or Dead King Wenceslas and you'll probably be able to find it. If you want to support my wider work here on the channel though, you can do so through Patreon or by Ko-fi, or just by joining my Discord. I've put all of the links to those in the description as well. And with that, the Carole of Dead King Wenceslas comes to a close for this year. I will leave you with what I think is an amazing song, written specifically for this release and performed by This Is Bardcore, that tells the tale of Dead King Wenceslas. Very Merry Christmas to you and all of yours, and a Happy New Year as well. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.
Dead King Wenceslas looked out on the field of vermin when the snow lay round about. Deep and crisp and even brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel when a poor man came in sight. Fleeing blighted mules, hear the page and stand by me. If thou knowst it telling yonder rodents what they be, where and what their dwellings are, they live a good league hence. Underneath the mountain many fell to their defense. Right by Olga's fountain bring me steel and fetch thou thine. Call my best men hither, thou and we shall see them die. When we spear them thither, page and monarch forth they went. The army marched together through the rude wind's wild lament. Into cursed nethers, by the night is darker now. When the rats are stronger, our quest must end for now. We should stay no longer. I hear footsteps, good my page. We will face them boldly, they shall meet our swords enraged. And our faith most holy, by their master they stayed stood. Those brave knights defended or were slain each single sword. And they were each damned a chaos land that drank their blood. Magic was possessing, cursed those men to fight still more. Deathless life unending.